Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Carolyn Woods, and I am the Marketing and Communication Manager at MarketLogic. I will also be your host and MC for the next hour. So if you have registered for the webinar, How Did We Not See This Coming? You are in the right place. So as you can see with this beautiful graphic of the Titanic, we are going to be talking about insights, how we get the right information to the right people at the right time, to avoid disaster, or in the business sense, disruption. I think for all of those who are working with insights, this is one of the most common refrains that we hear from our colleagues across the business functions. And I think it illuminates a pain point that many organizations feel when insights aren't properly translated into action. Before I get started and go into the agenda, I just want to give a brief introduction to the On24 platform. For those of you who haven't used it for a webinar before, I can just point you in the right directions. So you will have a few blocks on your screen, the presentation being one of them. But I think the most important thing is the menu bar in the bottom of your screen. Here you will be able to toggle the different blocks. And specifically, I'd like to point you towards the Q&A portion. So the question and answer block will be open for the entirety of the hour. If you have any questions, comments, etc., just drop it in there. We will be hosting a live Q&A at the end, at the tail end of the session. So any questions that you ask either now or later, we will answer live at the end of the webinar. So now let's move on to the agenda. So our first presentation will be the dynamics of public opinion. This will be presented by our friend Simon Atkinson, who is the Chief Knowledge Officer at IPSOS. For those of you unfamiliar, IPSOS is a global market research and public opinion specialist and a longtime partner of MarketLogic. Simon was nice enough to approve for the presentation for us about changing demographics, especially looking forward into population change and how that might influence how we survey public opinion, what insights are going to be relevant over the next decade or so. And I think this will give us more than enough food for thought to move into the next section of our agenda, which is the panel discussion. For this panel, I will be joined by Thomas Walker, Dyson's Insight Knowledge Manager, as well as Stefan Ropers, our own CEO here at MarketLogic. And then, as I mentioned, before we conclude, we will open it up to an open Q&A with the audience. So, as you can see, there's a lot to get through in the next hour. So, without further ado, I will start the show. Thanks so much for being here, guys.
Well, thank you everybody for inviting me to join you today. My name is Simon Atkinson. I work for IPSOS, and what I've tried to do for this session is to think about some ideas and perspectives on how we can all do a better job when it comes to thinking about the change all around us. I'm going to start by thinking about some of the recent polling and research that an organisation like IPSOS has been involved in over the last 12 months or so. And then we'll, in the second half of the presentation, just broaden it out a little bit to think about how we can think about trends in the longer term, perhaps set about some of the trends taking place over time, and indeed helping us be better prepared for whatever comes next. So in terms of our starting point, one of the things that we find quite a good lens to look at this question of the dynamic in which we're all in is a study we do called What Worries the World? As a researcher, I like it very much because it's the same questions over time. We never change the answer category except when something dramatic happens, like COVID. We give people a list in around 30 countries around the world, and we ask them to tell us what's most worrying in your country. So we're grounding it in a little bit anyway of the context in which people are living, rather than talking about some kind of global generalization which may not reflect particularly the lived reality. So we look at the year of 2022. On one level, the big headlines are twofold: a tale of two crises. Let's just look at the trend line as it's developed over the 12-month period. You can see the fall away of coronavirus, top at the start of 2022 in terms of being the main issue that people are worried about around the world. And then the rise in inflation, a little bit like rising prices for goods and services that we've all experienced, is bit by bit, month by month, it rose up the agenda. And on one level, we can really, I think, take that away as a big change we've seen over time. You can see it here in this chart. In almost every country, in fact, every country, you can see an increase over an 18-month period in the proportion of people who say rising prices are a big theme, a big worry in my country. When it comes to inflation, we can also, of course, see its impact on global consumer confidence. The best we could do at the moment is say that it's showing some stability, but we do have some quite marked changes over, let's say, the medium-term period. In most countries, people feeling less positive than they were going into the pandemic period 3 years ago. But even since February, seeing 16 out of 23 countries are showing lower scores than they were before the Russia invasion of Ukraine. So seeing some change, but also some variation by country, and quite difficult even to generalize on a topic like consumer confidence, even when there is a global cost of living crisis. So we sometimes have to pause a little bit before we start declaring things are a new landscape. Because if I go back to what was the world trend lines, I can remind myself quite quickly that not everything has gone up and not everything has gone down. Let's look at the middle of the chart. These are issues number 2, 3, unemployment, crime, corruption. It's almost like the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Do I have enough food to get on the table? Do I feel safe? Am I able to find employment? Those topics do not change. And it's really more the case, we think, that coronavirus and inflation shapes the experiences that we have, rather than they're saying that the big issues go away and people aren't worried about these topics anymore. And just to think about that, when we look at the full list in a kind of rank order bar chart, we've got those 4 topics there I was just talking about, and they are often the day-to-day concerns of people. And climate change and threats against the environment, while they may be rising up the agenda, don't always come out top when you ask questions grounded in all of the topics and all of the things that might affect people in their lives. And again, really a bit of a researcher's point, but those of you on the call who aren't researchers, well, we all are kind of researchers, at least at some points in our work. A reminder that you probably want to look at a basket of questions and a basket of indicators, because I could show you some slides with flashing lights saying 80% of people say that if we don't act quickly, we're going to have an environmental disaster. We've got nearly 6 in 10 people saying that I can see the effects of climate change taking place around me in my country right now. But a question like this shows where people's heads might be on the day-to-day. And on the day-to-day, this question about how are consumers reacting, I thought we might spend just a moment thinking about change over time when we're looking at people's day-to-day circumstances. So 68% of people report facing some challenges while shopping over the past couple of weeks. But I deliberately put in the chart, at the risk of it being too detailed, the change from a month previously, because it really wasn't very significant. It's a reminder that often if we're tracking movement over time, we may not see that much from month to month. Yes, people were saying prices for items were much higher, but they were actually saying that a year ago. We've got 33% saying prices are higher now. It was 25% a year ago. Items are out of stock. We've all been hearing about the supply chain. It's not that much higher than in November 2021, when 19% were saying that items are out of stock. So just remind us a little bit that change can happen perhaps a little bit more slowly than we sometimes might think. Just to give you one example from work that I was involved in earlier in the year, we were looking at a study called the Responsible Driving Barometer. It happens every year. We'll be trying to look at what's changed over time. And in this study, we're asking people to tell us about what they see out there on the road. We're asking people to rate drivers on a series of categories and picking out the ones that apply to different drivers: attentive, calm, courteous, vulnerable, stressed, aggressive, irresponsible, dangerous. Now, it probably may not surprise you that when we ask about our own driving, that we get slightly better scores than when we ask people what they think about those other drivers on the road. So when we ask about our own driving, look, at least one positive adjective. 97% of us praise our own driving at least once. 74% say we're attentive. Not quite so many say we're calm. Those were the figures from 2017. The figures from 2022 are almost identical. It's those other drivers who are, of course, the problem. 83% of us give them at least one negative adjective. Only 15% of us, for example, say they're attentive. 5 years later, though, the attentive score is up a little bit, from 15 to 20. The calm score is up a little bit, from 11 to 15. Just about a significant difference. What's going on there? Is it something to do with road safety conditions on the road? Well, I did look at the road safety figures, and we were finding that fatalities are well below pre-pandemic levels, but then maybe that's partly to do with traffic levels perhaps aren't quite at that level. So is there something happening around driver behaviours getting ever so slightly better over time, or is it more a broader reflection of the environment in which we are living in, particularly in the last few years? Just a reminder that even if we're in search of something that we think is an insight, they can prove a little bit elusive. Which brings us on to the question about how we can prepare when we're thinking about the longer term period. And by longer term these days, we're perhaps thinking about a year or more ahead. Here again, we have to be a little bit careful about jumping to immediate conclusions. And certainly those of us who spend at least a few moments on social media or reading the press, even some of the serious business press, may recall things like everything was about to change as we went into 2022. The Great Resignation shows 20% planning to quit soon. Actually, I would say quite a low number. We know that about 15% of the UK workforce changes every year. So if only slightly more than that are planning to quit, maybe actually things are more stable than we think. AI, on the other hand, it's going to change monumentally in 2022 and beyond. Well, I think that's probably not the first time we've seen that kind of headline. Uncertainty is everywhere. Attention, recession, and inflation and the pandemic are reshaping entertainment. Lots and lots of assertions about the changes that we see around them. Now, one of the problems is that the more we start to look into the future, even 1, 2, 3 years ago, the more boring it gets in terms of writing down succinctly what we think is going on, because you have to add scenario after scenario after scenario, and you might end up in rather an unhelpful situation if you're trying to write headlines. Now, many of us, of course, aren't trying to write headlines. We're trying to stay in touch with what's happening out there and perhaps do a better understanding, whatever our role is, to help understand the world out there and help our organisation make good decisions. Ipsos has found this framework quite helpful. It's quite simple, just 3 elements: making sure that we're thinking about the big forces around us that are changing the world and the environment, if not in terms of tectonic plates shifting, longer term shifts, the shifts that we can see around us, that we can start to measure, but also those signals of things that may be signs of change to come that we need to be prepared for, particularly if we're building those different scenarios that we might need to anticipate over time. So one of the macro forces that we've been working on, particularly in recent years is this question around the aging population. We've just reached this milestone of the world reaching 8 billion people. It's been given a reasonable amount of coverage. Some of the better coverage, though, is reminding us that population growth is already slowing down. And the big reminder that it places on us is a question about whether we are doing enough to understand the whole cross-section of our populations even today. And certainly there is a strong case that we need to widen our horizons a little bit. And I'm now talking about my own profession, market research, because we as a profession are obsessed with Generation Z or Generation Z, that group of people born from 1997, 1998 onwards. And we're writing things that are often plainly incorrect. They're not the silent majority. If we thought there were 4 in 10 consumers, we're going to really struggle, because even if I take babies and up to the people aged 24, 25, I'm still getting only close to 4 in 10 consumers. Then they may soon become the largest cohort of consumers. It depends how you categorize it, but certainly for the moment, they are not. We need to be in touch with the fuller cross-section of our population. India is about to become, some people say already has become, the most populous country in the world. It, of course, has a huge young population, aged under 25 or so, but it also has a very significant older population, and that pyramid is going to change and evolve over time. The India fertility rate is already below the replacement ratio, and we're going to see population fall there. This is the world population. Again, you can start to see more people towards the older end of the age spectrum. And as we move through this process, we need to remind ourselves, if I take the example of my own country, the UK, that if we're just focusing on Generation Z, we are only focusing actually on a certain proportion of the spending power out there in the market. A lot of the spending power, if we take the example of Korea, is going to be in the older age groups. And Korea, of course, being one of the most extreme population pyramids, the Christmas tree pyramid, some have called it. It's certainly not what we were studying when we were at school, looking at these kinds of demographic transition models. So even if we look in Europe, we have many countries where we have a similar pattern to Korea. This was Korea, of course. Italy already is looking very old when we look at its population pyramid. We did a presentation recently where our colleague really raised the question, are Italians doomed? Asking those questions of government, of society, and of businesses, and sharing the change in the population structure that country has been going through, and they are not going to be alone. The second way we've been looking at change is trying to think about those shifts that you can measure. So here I'm back on classic market research territory. I'm talking about 80% of consumers globally. They've got a preference for products from their own countries rather than abroad. This is a study that we did last year. We were raising the questions about what this means, for example, for international brands wanting to make sure they're being successful in different markets around the world. But even here, just as we're able to start to measure things and to talk about change, we end up with anyone who wants a simple life, annoying things happen. So what's the annoying thing that's happened there? Well, there's a new study, and we're very proud of our new study. It's just about to be launched. It's in 50 countries. But what does it show? It actually shows people swinging back towards global brands and thinking that they make better products than are just local to my country. So a shift that we thought we had identified that was taking place over a number of periods of years, we're now having to rethink that a little bit. And just a reminder about how we always have to have our antennae twitching, even if we feel reasonably certain about where we are. Which brings us on to the final element of trying to be closer to having a good understanding of change, which is around anticipating the signals of what's happening. Perhaps one of the ones we really can all observe and sense might be the ones around protectionism, polarization, drawbridges going up around the world, whether it's from the European Union or individual countries taking steps to make sure that they're doing the right thing for their part of the world or for their country. So will those signals further fuel deglobalization? Well, we'll have to be very, very close to that topic. And as we were looking at here, it's not necessarily going to be a simple cause and effect. It's going to be a whole series of issues that we're going to be having to diagnose and reflect on at the same time. So we need to, if not relax, be ready and calm-ish when we're trying to understand change and being comfortable with uncertainty. Of course, word of the year this year is the perma-crisis. Some people are preferring the topic polycrisis because it perhaps has the intersections of things all happening at the same time as being a good description of the environment in which we're living in. And just to give an example of that from the work that we were doing, at the end of 2021, we were asked to do a report which pulled together what we'd learned from the coronavirus period. And we did a lot of work to try and bring together experts and analysts from across our company, IPSOS, to help us boil down some of the things that we thought we'd learned from that experience. And we came up with a series of 10 key themes that we felt told the story so far of the pandemic experience and tried to take stock, we hoped, in a reflective way. Now, you'll notice the date on that report is April 2022, because just as we were about to publish, of course, things changed very significantly. We had the Omicron crisis, but then we had Russia invading Ukraine. We had to pause. We had to rewrite the document. And then eventually we did decide to release it. But quite frankly, it didn't make as much of an impact as we'd hoped it would because things had moved on. But perhaps in doing that work, it was helpful to us because we've been using some of those lessons this year, those lessons we did pull out from the 2 or now 3 years of the pandemic experience and its aftermath, the work we did to assess where our health is, a whole series of indicators pointing to how mental health is now seen as just as important as physical health right away around the world. The questions around inequalities widening, and certainly that spotlight being put on inequalities, whether it's country by country, region by region, or indeed, quite frankly, street by street. The adaptability and resilience of people, very, very clear during the pandemic period, and perhaps we're seeing that now as people go through the cost of living crisis, making those choices about how and what and where they shop, and showing that resilience. And that resilience, of course, being grounded in our countries, in our cultures, and in our communities. And I'll finish with a quick reference to where I started, which was our What Worries the World study. It's one we do on an international level, but we report it on a country level. And probably a really granular way of looking at these topics is to go into the detail of the communities, looking at those differences, for example, between big cities and small towns and rural areas, which perhaps are under-researched and under-thought through, actually, particularly in the commercial aspects of market research, because certainly we're finding from a top-line level, there's often more, for example, that perhaps unites some of the big cities than unites the small town and rural areas when we look from country to country. So we need to ground ourselves as best we can in the context in which people are living. We never really, I think, can feel entirely confident that we've nailed exactly what's going on and where we're going next. But I hope this has been useful just in setting the scene and sharing some experiences really about how we can get closer to understanding change and perhaps do a little bit more of a reflective job when we're talking about change to other people. So thank you very much for having me with you today, and I hope that's been useful.
All right. So many thanks again to Simon for preparing that presentation for us and for covering such a broad range of information in such a succinct time frame. I think we could take even just one slide from that presentation and speak for an hour or two on it. But I think that's a great sort of introduction to now the more discussion-based portion of the show. As I mentioned before, I'll be joined by Stefan Ropers, the CEO of Market Logic, and Thomas Walker, the Insights Knowledge Manager at Dyson. So Stefan and Thomas, you can turn on your videos and microphones now. All right, I can see both of you guys. Perfect. So yeah, we heard a little bit from Simon that even an agency, a market research agency at the scale of Ipsos, almost shelved one of their huge reports this year because market changes and geopolitical trends made the impact of that report less impactful in a matter of weeks. So I think that's something that us in the insights and market research fields are really facing, this increased market volatility, the accelerating rate of change. How do we now make impact with insights given these accelerating conditions? So that's kind of the broad strokes of what we're going to be speaking about today in the panel. But first, why don't you guys go ahead and give yourselves a bit of a more personal introduction about yourself, your background, and the role that you guys both have within the world of insights. So Thomas, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me along. It's always great to hear different opinions and different views. My name is Tom Walker. I'm the Insight Knowledge Manager here at Dyson. So I work within the commercial function and support the strategy for the knowledge management, as well as delivering a knowledge management solution to the business. My background is in intelligence and research, so it's a little bit of a kind of new area for me, but I certainly understand the challenges. Understand what kind of makes a knowledge management solution tick with the business.
Yeah, I definitely think you have a unique background coming from intelligence. So I'll be interested to see how that changes your lens on the insights, the developments in the insights field. And now I'll move over to you, Stefan. Can you just give a short introduction about yourself and your background in the insights industry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm struggling a bit with technology, so bear with me. I hope you can see and hear me.
Yeah,
but very pleased to have you all. I'm Stefan Ropers. I'm the CEO of Market Logic, and I'm a tech platform growth leader for the last 25 years. I'm a German national, and soon I'm going to be the father of 4 kids, not at once. So I step by step got there to stay with the truth. And I see myself living in 2 roles, really, with regards to insights. Number one, as the CEO of Market Logic, of course, and then as an individual. As CEO, I think about our purpose a lot. And the purpose really is helping people make more insightful decisions. And as we learned from Simon in his fascinating presentation, it's not easy to derive insights from all forms of intelligence and data and really get to, okay, what does this mean in terms of action and decision? So I find that fascinating. And then as an individual, of course, I think about how I can obtain and absorb insights in a world that is getting more and more complicated. As we look at all of these trends, things change fast, and it feels increasingly harder to compose a worldview that lets one make good decisions as an individual. So that's where I am.
Okay, great. So I think we both, or the 2 of you, bring a unique perspective to this panel discussion. Let's just start off. Again, I said that the broad strokes kind of overview for this panel is about making impact with insights. So let's just start at the very, very beginning here. and ask, how do you define impact in this context with insights? So, Stefan, I can pass it to you first, and then back to you.
Of course. I mean, very simply, for me, impact means triggering change action, no matter whether that's small or a big change. Maybe two examples can be driving awareness of an issue at a team level, at an individual contributor level for something that is not working, and trigger a discussion as to why the issue occurs, because that's really the important thing to then derive action from that. And that is impact for me. That would be unthinkable without having the insight in the first place of what is happening and then why it is happening. Or maybe as a second example, it can be an enterprise-wide transformation that a CEO, for example, leads to make an organization more customer-centric or more agile. And in this example, risks or opportunities that are visible in the market environment become a trigger for action. So both examples have in common that there is action driven by insights, and that's the recipe.
Yeah, great. And for yourself, Thomas?
Yeah, I think for us, we've defined the kind of impact of the insight community and specifically our researchers. So for us, it's really about just informing decision makers and supporting them with making those business decisions. And I think what's been quite interesting with our business in the last 12 months is that we've really used impact as our kind of key measure of success when implementing a knowledge management solution. So it allows us to demonstrate and to measure that kind of increase in return on investment for research. And the way I think we've measured that is by just making sure that the research is ending up in the right hands. So yeah, we have generated a bit of a metric to do that, and we've provided it to one of our KPIs for the year. But I think, put quite simply, it's about getting the right research into the right hands to inform the right decision making.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating to take something as qualitative as impact and then turn it into a KPI. So kudos for Dyson for kind of leading on that. And, you know, the idea of impact being related to specific decisions or specific actions that are being taken, I think it's easier said than done is what we've all found, because even, you know, if you do your due diligence and spend time creating beautifully made insights, there have been studies that, you know, marketers or other business units do tend to go on gut reaction when making some decisions. So it's up to us in the insights field to kind of change those patterns of behaviors and break those patterns of behaviors that many times are very well situated and have like long histories within these organizations. So that kind of moves into the next question, which is more about the cultural impact or the cultural influence that prioritizing insights can have on an organization more broadly. So beyond just your day-to-day responsibilities, have you noticed that there are any cultural changes or new behaviors that you're seeing in your colleagues or other team members when you start to prioritize insights and prioritize impact with insights? So let's go to Thomas. We can just reverse the order for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think the way we look at this really is about understanding how we can best answer those business questions. And the crucial part of that really for us is taking stock of the resources that we have available. So at Dyson, we're quite a mature customer here with MarketLogic. So we have a wealth of research that sits within our platform. And for us, it's about making sure that we understand how we can use that to answer those questions now, and how we can offer more context to these questions as well, beyond just research from the insight community. So we like to position our knowledge management solution really as the kind of first port of call for any business question that can be answered. So the prioritization really does kind of come through our platform. Really exciting place for us. And it allows us to kind of conduct onboarding really positively, as well as kind of have a better understanding around kind of new projects and new problems that the business. But it allows us to, I suppose, increase the return on investment, because we're able to use existing knowledge to answer new questions that the business are answering and generating.
Yeah. And Stefan, what are you seeing in terms of the cultural impact that insights can have?
Yeah, look, I'm trying to maybe synthesize what we're seeing in our work with 100 customers across the globe, and that is that business decision making, aside from the onboarding and engagement questions that large enterprises have, suffer from information bias very frequently, and that is availability bias. So you look at the last data point you've gotten, or the one that is available, or you select something for no good reason and pull it out as the one thing. And I'm still reminded of this picture of seeing a gray wall, and then through the window, and you describe to everyone, there's a gray wall there now. My neighbor has moved closer to me, and yet then you go closer to the window. It's an elephant that's standing right by the window. So. And then, aside from information bias, there's a lack of aligned context and direction in enterprises. If you have multiple business units and you have a corporate strategy, people are not on one page, depending on whether they work in the organization, right? And I believe if insights become pervasive in the sense that they are available in a very friction-free way, more decisions are made with better quality and better outcomes, and then what that drives is behavioral change. Of course, only then if the organization reinforces these new behaviors and celebrates, showcases them, rewards them, and then this behavior that started maybe with one or two people becomes a broad movement and the culture change. And I cannot emphasize enough how much the insights team and business leaders have to work together to make that happen. It really requires that intentional cooperation to drive such transformation towards a new culture. And what it also means is that insights leaders such as yourselves are transformational leaders across the company, because you have the goods, right? The currency that can drive the change. And so the approach always seems to be three things, right? It's pervasive, friction-free availability of insights. So that's where it starts. That needs to be enabled by technology. Then secondarily, it's about a strong partnership between the insights organization, however it is shaped, and the business side to really align on objectives and how to communicate and what to do. And then third, it is about the transformational leadership of everyone involved, and particularly the insights leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that nicely lies out the connection between small sort of administrative changes that you make and how they kind of create this domino effect to actually change and transform company strategy. Thomas, you mentioned that you're working on making your insights platform the first port of call, I think you said, for anyone across the business to come and find an answer that acts as this single source of truth. And I think, that in effect, it helps transform insights experts as just a service unit that you go to when you need a single question answered, to people that are more actively involved in the strategy. So it's kind of a win-win, because it makes people's lives easier when finding information, but it also gives a little bit more for the insights teams to do in actively promoting strategy within the company. So I think, in that sense, we talk about the intense changes that are coming down the road for us and market volatility, and that can seem quite ominous, but I also think that there is quite a bright future for the role of insights teams. And I think both of those truths can be kind of held at the same time. But speaking of, the volatility and new market conditions that have kind of been underlying as Simon's presentation as well, He spoke about the idea of a perma crisis, how there's always, in the last few years, whether it is public health or geopolitics or changing consumer behaviors or what have you, the market conditions have been a little bit more volatile, to put it simply. And as a direct response to that, we are hearing the word resilience pop up and be sort of spoken about more frequently as a top priority for our enterprise customers. I at least know that from the market logic point of view. So speaking specifically about resilience now, enterprise resilience and preparing for the future in these extreme market conditions, what do you think the role of consumer insights will be? And I will go to Stefan for this question.
Yeah, I will step back a little because what Simon has impressively described is there's tectonic shifts in the composition of our consumer audiences. Of course, that's one, and we looked at different countries. I thought that was fascinating stuff, but there's also tectonic shifts elsewhere, and some questions have come up here in the chat as well about more the geopolitical, supply chain, and macro environment, in fact. And if we look outside, and it was on Simon's chart as number 2 pain, central banks have tightened conditions in light of rising inflation. That was pain, which means that enterprises have a reduced availability of capital for making investments, essentially, and fund their businesses. So maybe that's the first thought that I have on resilience, aside from some other ones, which is about the capital misallocation mistakes that enterprises in the past were making because they didn't have the insights to put the money into the right brands, into the right kind of product, and weren't anticipative enough to prosper. So in this new normal of perma-crisis, things are more about flawless decision-making ad hoc in real time, right? So there is no forgiveness anymore given the tightness of capital. So that is one aspect of resilience, this insights-driven investment decisions. But then we've also seen during the COVID crisis that there's another aspect which is more the ability to make adjustments to the business on the fly, which requires to be nimble and to be anticipating things out there, like changing customer behaviors, or people have needed a mask holder or a mask storage device 10 years ago. No one, right? Like doctors, but now we all want to carry around our masks, so that becomes an opportunity. And then lastly, maybe there's a less discussed aspect of resilience is whether it's built into the culture. And I think that's a very important one, where if you empower people with insights on a daily basis, I believe they feel generally more empowered to face adversity and benefit from that. So it's a form of engagement that goes beyond just sort of the normal worker, because they're now informed, they're abreast of what's changing out there, and so now they can take action in a very different way, capable of dealing with this adversity. So these attributes of resilience are fueled and supported by insights. I think those are the ones that come to my mind.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a detour before the next question, because something you just said gives me a question that I want to ask Thomas, because you talk about how insights can act as this kind of protective shield against adversity, giving people both confidence and foresight when it comes to changing market conditions. And I think Dyson is a kind of unique company when it comes to this, because they have for so many years now been seen as innovators in their industry. They've been not necessarily just taking a product that they have and slightly tweaking it just to, slow growth. They're about kind of introducing products that don't have as much of a competitive market there to base these consumer insights on. So I'm wondering, Thomas, if there's any insights you can give us about what resilience looks like in a company that prioritizes innovation and being disruptors when the market is calling for us all to kind of hunker down and just play it safe.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, really, and I think within a technology company that's different and innovative, we're probably more comfortable with a level of uncertainty than perhaps others. But I think what we're seeing, and I think Simon did an excellent job of just kind of underlining the state of perma-crisis and what that means for us all, is that there is just a next layer of uncertainty that we now all need to become comfortable with. And I think for us and for the consumer insights community, it's about kind of getting that slightly more granular detail to Simon's cone of uncertainty and starting to fill in a few more of those blanks. And crucially, I think what we try and do, and I think what I think we're seeing as perhaps more of an emerging trend, is that we need to start building in more of those indicators and warnings at those different junctions, so that when we're able to track whether we're likely to move off into another course of action because we've seen another shock, or whether we've seen another trend that's come out of that state of permacrisis. So I think for us, crucially, it's about being comfortable with a level of uncertainty, but by making sure that you're identifying the risks, and then you know where you are and how to track which course of action you're going down, and where there is perhaps more risk than there was yesterday.
Yeah, and just to tag on to that, I think the next question is quite simply for you, Thomas. Do you find that your job working in insights, is it harder than it was a year ago, or have you feel like you've successfully adapted to the new normal of changing consumer behaviors?
Yeah, I think we're a relatively unique example, because we're, I think, quite happy with the level of uncertainty. But I think we've definitely noticed that there are more situations that perhaps we all know a little bit more about, and I think that coincides with us being in a space where we are very well informed. We've got access to more content than we've ever had before, and often, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier as well, is that it does introduce a level of bias. We all know a little something about a lot of things, and I think the COVID-19 pandemic is probably a really fantastic example of that, where within a few weeks of the world entering a lockdown, we'd all become part-time epidemiologists and had a fantastic idea about how we were going to see ourselves out of this crisis. But I think the challenge for the insight community is navigating that really well-informed audience that they're communicating with, and ensuring that you've got a proactive stance to get the right research in front of the right people at the right time, and then having that personal and that human interaction to be able to intercept perhaps when people haven't fully understood a topic, or understanding when you need to be interjecting with perhaps a little bit more research to support a business decision.
Yeah, I think, from our end in Market Logic, we're definitely seeing that it doesn't devalue any individual insights. It just means that there needs to be more constant real-time updates. So if anything, it adds a level of urgency to people in the insights departments at their specific organizations, rather than making them less valuable. I don't know, Stefan, if you would agree with that perspective from Market Logic's side and what we've heard from our customers.
Completely. There's really nothing to add here. Yeah.
So let's look a little bit into the future. Obviously, in the insights field, we don't want to just make predictions based off zero facts, but it is sometimes fun to just kind of imagine hypothetically what the world might look like in 2023 and beyond. But specifically the evolution of the insights function. So what are you guys seeing in how you do your job, how other business units within your organizations are using you and your team and your insights that give you a sense of how your role is going to evolve in 2023? I'll go back to Thomas first.
Yeah, I think for us, we're seeing the kind of maintenance of this permacrisis is probably the number one trend that we're going to see moving forward into 2023. And I think we've spoken a little bit about uncertainty, but complexity is probably the next kind of big word I think we need to throw in. Because some of the issues, whether we're looking at kind of cost of living, the pandemic, the war in Europe, or kind of the economic downturn, are all incredibly complicated subjects that we need to be able to break down and communicate in a way that is going to be engaging and understood by an audience from across a number of functions within the business. And I think for us, a lot of the time, the way we address those problems is through some quite simple means, really. So I think just being very mindful about the use of language, how we're communicating particularly with some of those kind of high impact bits of research, as well as thinking about kind of new and innovative ways of communicating complex problems, whether that's with kind of analytics or diagrams or perhaps something more creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the same insights but delivered, a little bit more compelling so that they have better visibility across the organization. I think most people would agree with that.
And I think as well, we look at it as tailoring that approach somewhat. So the people that are really kind of in tune with the research or perhaps it's answering a bespoke business decision, they're getting the product that they need to see. But the rest of the business that maybe just need to be informed of it, they're getting something perhaps that engages them in a way that works with their ways of working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Stefan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, look, I completely agree with Thomas' characterization of sort of the whole backdrop, right? Complexity, perma-crisis, speed. And so I have thought maybe there's four things, right? Like synthesis, which seems to resonate with what Thomas said on like making things very easy and communicable, right? So people can understand complex issues better and know what to derive in terms of action. And for me, that's the synthesis of quantitative and qualitative data into insights, right? So it's the what is happening, the detection of data looking different than anticipated, and then why in terms of the sense making. So that's the synthesis point. Then I think the insights organizations need to be set up so they can react or even proact. And what this means, I believe, is they need to be federated somehow in a hub and spoke model where you have experts at the center that run an infrastructure, and then you have spokes that reach out into the business. And if you compare the two at the hub and in the spoke, the hub is more an inside expert, whereas the spokes are more business-oriented insights expert, trying to strike a balance between sort of central productivity and more closeness to the business and different consumer audiences. And then third one for me is delivering insights as a service, really this pervasive way of shipping the insights into the context of the individual decision makers. And maybe lastly, and there were questions about this, since locality and context is king, I believe crowdsourcing for insights needs to become a reality as well, where you use experts from the field that maybe work in your hair care unit or your vacuum unit in Southeast Asia and let them contribute insights about what is going to happen in the market versus just running this centrally. So those are the four for me.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even touch on that, but I think that's also kind of top of mind for a lot of people as we, move and settle into hybrid and remote workforces. Is that you need that insights as a service or that baseline structure so that you can as easily share insights with teams that are dispersed across time zones and across different markets as you were when maybe you were working out of the same office with them. So I think that's also something we've talked about this year that we didn't really touch on, but maybe save that for another webinar as we are winding down here. Yeah. But yeah, I think I think we covered a lot here. We do have some questions in the chat. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of them, and I think one was definitely up Simon's alley in terms of his wheelhouse. When we talk about supply chain, I know that he said that was definitely a high priority. Securing the supply chain was a high priority for a lot of enterprises, but I think it's interesting that, that presentation, he sent it to me a few days ago, and even in the last 48 hours, we've seen news out of China and the relaxation of their zero COVID policy, and a lot of people are worrying what that means for the supply chain out of China. So that just goes to show that even a presentation that is less than 48 hours old, there's already new information that we need to take into account and new insights to fold into our understanding of that issue. So, I think broad takeaways from this discussion is that if anything, there's more urgency to deliver insights to the right people at the right time. But because of the work that's required to deliver these insights, we can't expect insights teams to just be service units to be answering questions. They need time to actually be formulating the insights themselves. So having processes, having a platform that can act as a place where business units can self-serve their own answers and find insights that are tailored to them without the manual labor of insights teams. I think that's definitely the future and where we're heading. Kind of marrying the human expertise of people like Thomas with the technical automation and capacities of a enterprise-grade end-to-end insights platform. So I think this is a fascinating discussion, guys. I really appreciate you donating your time and energy, and I think we can have another discussion in a month and have completely new topics to talk about. So I look forward to keeping this series going. But I think that will wrap up our time today. So you can see here, if you want to get in touch, there is an email address. If you want to be involved or just notified about future webinars that we'll be hosting, this is going to be a regular occurrence. I love talking to the insights professionals about what they're seeing on the ground. And I think Market Logic has built a really valuable partnership of different agencies and clients and organizations. So I think all that's left for me to say is please get in touch either directly or using this email address if you have any questions. We will make this recording available if you want to go back and soak in the information that we've shared and Simon has shared. And other than that, I can just say we hope to see you again soon at our next event. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, enjoy the break. And thank you again, Thomas and Stefan, for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.